Well, hi, thank you for joining us as part of our Grove Counseling Ministry. We just wanted to do a recording and just encourage you guys during this summer. And the different summer holidays are usually about remembering sacrifices done for us, remembering the freedoms we have as a nation. And so coming up on 4th of July, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the biblical examples we have of remembering. And all of our journeys in life, maybe you're going through something hard right now. Maybe you're in the middle of a fight in your journey. We think that we can remember that God is with us and for us. And I just want to take some time just to look at this idea of these memorial or standing stones that God shows in Scripture. So a couple weeks ago, I was moving gravel in my backyard. And I decided to redo my backyard in the middle of the summer in Arizona. So that just shows you how smart I am. But anyway, I'm out there and I'm shoveling gravel in the heat of the day. Again, not very smart. And just trying to get it done. Wheelbarrow full after wheelbarrow full. I'm just like, let's get done with this. Let's just go until it's done. And I sit down for a second to take a drink of water. And my kids come up to me and say, "Dad, there's someone here." And my neighbor showed up. And I'd lived next to this guy, down the street from this guy for 7 years. Never said more than 2 sentences to him. And he says, "Hey, I've got an hour, a wheelbarrow, and a shovel. What can I do to help?" And that just showed me the heart of a servant, the heart of our men and women who serve our nation in the armed forces or on the front lines in acts of service like being a police officer or a fireman. And just for me, it's just a reminder of, as Christians, what we're called to do is see a need, fill a need, show the love of Christ, and serve with action whenever you can. And so thank you, neighbor Mike. Appreciate you stepping up. And truth be told, he stayed for like 2 hours. And he helped me immensely right when I was ready to quit and I was ready to throw in the towel. So today we're going to talk about remembering the one who is with us in the battles, remembering the one who's with us in the storms and the struggles. Memories can be hard. We can have memories that bring pain, that bring the reminder of loss and struggle. But God is with you in the struggle. He's with you even in the loss, and he's faithful. He's faithful through it all, and he will get you through the darkest night of your soul. Whatever you're going through, he's with you, and the sun will come up again. So this idea of stones of remembrance and these like monuments or milestones that help us remember the journey is a biblical thing. Now, I want to remind us of the nation of Israel. They had been slaves in Egypt for 400 years. And then through Moses' leadership, they left. They left slavery. God parted the Red Sea. They walked across representing freedom on dry ground. And then they wandered. They wandered for years. For 40 years in the desert, they lost their path. They lost kind of their drive and where they were going. And in that time, Moses passes away, and you've got this guy named Joshua. Moses' intern. Now he's the man, and he's called to pick up where Moses left off. Can you imagine the intensity that would bring? He was probably intimidated because Moses was the man. Like, he's the legend. He was the dude who went before Pharaoh. How am I supposed to lead these people if Moses couldn't do it to the promised land? And in Joshua 1, we see God reminding Joshua 3 separate times that he's with him and to be strong and courageous. And so just for a second, wherever you are, whatever you're going through, I want to remind you, God wants to remind you, be strong and courageous. He's with you. He doesn't throw you out in the cold. He walks with you through the storm. And so that's what Joshua had to be reminded of before he even did a thing as leader. And so now Joshua is the leader, and they're about to cross another body of water. Now, again, the Red Sea represented the dividing line between slavery and freedom. Well, the Jordan River was the dividing line between no purpose and promise. And so they'd wandered for 40 years, but the Jordan, once they crossed the Jordan, they were on their way to the promised land. Yeah, battles would come. More challenges were on their way. Jericho was looming. But passing the Jordan, crossing the Jordan meant they were on their way to the promised land that God had for them. So there was a caveat though. Before the water of the Jordan would stop flowing, the priest that would lead the nation into the water had to first step foot into the water. Now the Jordan River was at flood stage. And so it was intimidating by itself. It was a rushing river that had power behind it. Looking at it, 1 foot into the water meant you were swept downstream. But God had said to Joshua, send the priests, send the Ark of the Covenant. In a sense, he's like, I'm gonna go first, because his presence was in the Ark of the Covenant. And he asked the priests to take a step into the river. Once they took a step into the river, it stopped flowing. Once they took a step of action, then God showed up. So I'm going to read this in Joshua 4. It says, so Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe. And this is while they were crossing the river. So it parts and they're walking across. So they're in the middle of the miracle. Just footnote there. They're not even all the way across, but they're seeing it happening. The river's stopped, it's parted, they're walking on dry ground, and God has this instruction for Joshua and his people. He says, go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, again, a dry Jordan River. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, and they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. Stones of remembrance, 12 stones, 1 stone for every tribe of Israel that God had called. Each tribe had a representative, and that representative picked out the stone. Picked out the stone that would represent the promise, and that God was present in the promise, that God was with them in the dry riverbed. He was with them in this ceremonial passing from the wandering to the promise. This is a common theme through the Old Testament. Remembrance stones, or masebas, or standing stones. They were meant to catch your eye. Generations later would ask, what is that? Why is that there? What's up with those stones, Dad? Well, let me tell you, son, this is when God showed up. This is when God delivered me. That's when God did something amazing. That's when God was faithful. Think of your own journey. Don't just tell me your struggles. Don't just tell me your rock bottom about your journey. Don't just tell me about your failures. Tell me of when God showed up. Tell me about when he gave you strength to overcome a hurdle, to get through a challenge, to get over a barrier. God's victories with you in the past can be strengths and strengthen you for the challenge at hand. You see, when you're struggling, that's when you look at the stone, because the stone reminds you of God's faithfulness. And it reminds you that God will do it again. So breaking down this passage a little bit, think of where they'd been. 40 years. 40 years of wandering, 40 years of struggling every morning, right? They'd wake up and they'd be hungry. And they'd be like, God, did you lead us out here to die? We could have died in Egypt as slaves. Why'd you bring us out here to die? We're hungry. And God provided bread from heaven bread. They would wake up, they would see this like white stuff all over the ground. It was food, it was edible. And they were told, they would ask, what is this? And they were told, gather enough for one day. Get enough to get you through this. God provides. Those were little mini edible standing stones for them every single day, that God would provide for them, that God would walk with them. And think about the fact that, they'd wandered for 40 years and their leader even died. They didn't make it to the finish line. Maybe they were struggling. Maybe they were running thin on hope, thin on motivation. And now this intern guy, he's in charge? Like, I remember when he was just some punk that was like carrying, Moses' water or whatever. He's in charge? We're following this guy? And then there's the river. You seen that river? It's impossible. It's a river of impossibility. There's no way we can cross that. There's no way. God makes a way when there's no way. He does. He sees the impossible and he's like, hey, nothing's impossible for me. Let me show you the possibility with me at the helm. But they had to step into the water. That step of faith, though, we've been there, haven't we? Where we're paralyzed by fear, or our eyes are telling us no way. But our faith needs to mobilize our feet so we take a step into that water. And it's only with that step of faith that they would walk on dry ground across the riverbed. And then these stones. These stones weren't gathered from the banks. They were gathered from the middle of the river. They had to be, because that was how it was a sign of God's faithfulness. They were stones you wouldn't have got if it wasn't a dry ground. They were big. I imagine these guys, they probably picked their strongest man in each tribe to carry these things. They had it heaped over their shoulder, and they had to pick a big stone to show that we have a big God. These are stones they shouldn't have had access to except for God, except for his faithfulness. One stone per tribe. Also showing God's individual plan for each tribe, and that his plan was still intact. Stones to remember God's faithfulness. Stones to remember the journey. Stones to remember the struggle. Also the progress. And also the promise. So the thing is, we need to, in the future, remember what God has done in the past. That was the point of this for them. In Joshua 4:19-24, I continue to read here. It says, on the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples on the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. This is him reminding us of his power, of his faithfulness, that fear needs to leave when God's involved. Fear keeps you immobile, but faith causes you to move. So remember during the journey. I think it's important to have moments of remembering. In our Celebrate Recovery ministry here at the Grove, we have people come get a little plastic chip. And that little plastic chip is marking their journey. And it reminds them, it's a mini standing stone that they can put in their pocket, they can put on their keychain, they can keep on their dresser or in their wallet to remind them of God's faithfulness, to remind them of the journey, to remind them that God will never abandon them. So where are the struggles of the past? But better, where did God get you through the struggles of the past? How has God shown you his power? And where do you need to take a step of faith in your life right now? Maybe you're standing at the bank, you're looking at the river, you're like, no way, no way. Take a step. Take a step into that river. Then God will show up. Then you will see his power and his might. To Israel, these stones meant God's faithfulness. It meant he was powerful. It meant he got them through the river and he would do it again. What are your stones? What are the things that you use to remember the journey? And what do they mean to you? God is faithful and God is for you. Thanks for joining us.